remembering those that survived the sinking of the RMS Titanic on April 15, 1912. The information provided was obtained and used from findagrave.com. This video contains passengers and employees with the last name starting with L. The remaining survivors will follow shortly. Ali Lam, born 1874, birthplace unknown. He boarded the Titanic and was a third-class passenger. Ali was rescued in Lifeboat C by the Carpathia. He was 38 years of age at the time of the disaster. His date of death and burial details are unknown. The next survivor is Aurora Adelia Landergren Johnson, born 1889, in Sweden. By 1912, she was living with her parents and decided to immigrate to New York. Aurora booked a passage on the Scandinavia-America line. On her way to Denmark, she was accompanied by two other gentlemen. They convinced Aurora to follow them to England. Due to the coal strike, they were rebooked onto Titanic. That fateful night, Aurora returned to her cabin for her prayer book and some personal items. Her male friends then assisted her in Lifeboat 13. The male friends perished in the sinking. Aurora later received $75 from the Red Cross, but no damages were paid. In 1922, Aurora married Mr. Johansson, anglicizing their surname to Johnson. The couple never had any children and spent their lives in New York. Aurora passed away in 1947 at the age of 58. She was buried in New York. The next survivor is Fong Lang, born 1894, in China. He was a third-class passenger on board the Titanic. Fong was rescued in Lifeboat 14 by the Carpathia. He was listed as a seaman and was 32 years of age at the time of the sinking. After the disaster, Fong changed his name to Wing Sun Fong. He passed away in 1986 at the age of 91. Wing is buried in Illinois. The next survivor is the LaRoche family. Mother, Juliette Marie Louise Lafargue LaRoche. Daughter, Simone Marie and André LaRoche. Daughter, Louise Marie Marguerite LaRoche. Unborn son, Joseph Lemercier LaRoche. Juliette Marie Louise Lafargue LaRoche, born 1889, in France. Mr. LaRoche met his future wife, Juliette. After he received his degree, they were married. Their daughter Simone was born in 1909, and a second daughter, Louise, was born prematurely in 1910, and she suffered medical problems. Joseph found work, but his employers paid him poorly. The family needed more money to pay for medical bills. They had planned to return to Haiti in 1913 to seek a better paying job. In 1912, Juliette discovered she was pregnant. So the family decided to leave for Haiti earlier, before her pregnancy became too far advanced. For a welcome present, her in-laws bought their tickets on the La France, but the company's policy, at that time, required children to stay in a nursery, as they were not allowed in the ship's restaurant. The couple did not want separation at mealtime, so they exchanged their booking on the Titanic as second-class passengers. As the ship sank, Mr. LaRoche stuffed his coat pockets with money and jewelry. He took his pregnant wife and daughters up to the boat deck, where they entered a lifeboat. Mr. LaRoche wrapped his coat around Juliette and said to her, "Here, take this. You are going to need it. I'll get another boat, God be with you. I'll see you in New York." Mr. LaRoche perished in the sinking at the age of 26. Juliette and the girls were rescued in Lifeboat 14 by the Carpathia. They were taken to a hospital, where Juliette's feet were frozen and treated. The loss of her husband, personal belongings, combined with pain and fright, Juliette canceled her plans to go on to Haiti and returned to France instead. After arriving in France, Juliette gave birth to her son, Joseph. Juliette sued White Star Line for damages, and was awarded 150,000 francs or approximately $29,000. She used the money to open a fabric dyeing business to support her family. The family devoted not to speak publicly about the event. Simone Marie and André Laroche, born 1909, in France. She passed away before her mother, in 1973, at the age of 64. Juliette passed away in 1980, at the age of 90. Joseph Lemercier Laroche, born 1912, in France. He passed away in 1987, at the age of 74. Louise Marie Marguerite Laroche, born 1910, in France. She became a member of the Titanic Historical Society. She passed away in 1998, at the age of 87. They all were buried together in the Laroche family plot located in France. The next survivor is Elizabeth Lavington, born 1872, in England. She was a stewardess on the Titanic. Elizabeth survived the sinking in Lifeboat 11. She never married. Elizabeth passed away in 1949, at the age of 77. She was cremated, and the whereabouts of her remains is unknown. The next survivor is Dr. Alice May Farnham Leader, born 1862, in New York. She was a first-class passenger on the Titanic. Alice escaped from the Titanic on the same boat which carried the Countess Rothus. She passed away in 1944, at the age of 81, due to heart failure. Alice is buried in New York. The next survivor is Elizabeth Mary Edwards Leather, born 1861, in England. In 1881, she married Mr. Leather, and they never had any children. Elizabeth was a stewardess on the Titanic. She survived the sinking in Lifeboat 16. Elizabeth testified at the British inquiry on the Titanic disaster. She was widowed in 1914. Elizabeth passed away in 1937 at the age of 76. The headstone was erected in 2025. Elizabeth was buried in England. The next survivor is Henry Reginald Lee, born 1882, in England. Also known as Mr. F. Martin. In 1905, Henry was married, and they had 2 children. In 1912, a man signed on to the Titanic as a scullion, naming himself as F. Martin. He survived the sinking in Lifeboat 13. The true identity of F. Martin was long unclear. F. Martin, or Frank Martin, or again, Frank Edward Martin, was the pseudonym of another man named Henry Lee. For many years, the relatives of Henry Lee were enthralled by the tales of how he escaped the Titanic. They checked his name on the passenger and crew list, but to no avail. Some came to the conclusion that he concocted a tale to impress people. However, Henry Lee was indeed telling the truth. 7 days after the sinking, Henry and his wife had another daughter. Their eldest daughter passed away towards the end of the year. Henry returned to a life at sea. In 1918, Henry and his wife welcomed another daughter. Henry passed away in 1965, at the age of 82. He is buried in England, in an unmarked grave. The next survivor is Reginald Robinson Lee, born 1870, in England. He was on duty as a co-lookout on the Titanic. Reginald survived the sinking after being assigned as a rower to Lifeboat 13. He was ordered to appear before the British Board of Trade to give his testimony as a material witness. Reginald served on board the vessel Kenilworth Castle until shortly before his death. He passed away in 1913 at the age of 43 due to heart failure resulting in pneumonia. Reginald was buried in England. There is no mention made on the headstone of the Titanic. The Friends of Highland Road Cemetery had his grave cleaned. The Friends unveiled a plaque and was added to the grave. The next survivor is Jessie Wills Leach, born 1880, in Scotland. She boarded the Titanic with the Reverend Harper and his daughter. Jessie and Annie survived in Lifeboat 11. She married Mr. Anderson. Jessie passed away at a hospital in 1963 at the age of 82. She is buried in Wales. The next survivor is Bertha Lehman-Lors, born 1895, in Switzerland. She boarded the Titanic as a second-class passenger. After recovering from seasickness, she babysat the famous Navitral twins. They were the little boys that were kidnapped by their father. Bertha escaped in Lifeboat 12, while the Navitral twins escaped in Collapsible D. The twins' father perished in the sinking. Bertha married Mr. Zimmerman, who passed away in World War I. She later married Mr. Lors. Bertha passed away in 1967 at the age of 72 due to heart failure. She is buried in Minnesota. The next survivor is Jessie Wills Leach, born 1880, in Scotland. She boarded the Titanic along with the Reverend Harper and his daughter. When the Titanic sank, Jessie and his daughter survived in Lifeboat 11. Reverend Harper perished in the sinking. Jessie married Mr. Anderson until his death in 1928. She passed away at a hospital in 1963 at the age of 82. Jessie is buried in Wales. The next survivor is Amelia Hunt Lamore, born 1866, in England. In 1997, she was married to Mr. Lamore. Amelia was a second-class passenger on the Titanic. She was rescued in Lifeboat 14. Amelia passed away in 1950 at the age of 84. She is buried in England. The next survivor is Berthe Leroy, born 1884, in France. She was a first-class passenger on the Titanic. Berthe was the maid to Mrs. Douglas. She passed away in 1972 at the age of 87. Berthe is buried in France. The next survivor is Louis Gustave Joseph Lesueur, born 1876, in France. He was a first-class passenger on the Titanic and manservant to Mr. Cardeza. Louis passed away in 1939 at the age of 62 due to hanging. His body was found in Petit Quevilly's woods a few days later. Louis is buried in France. The next survivor is Arthur Ernest Red Lewis, born 1884, in England. In 1902, he was married. Arthur worked on the Titanic as a steward, third class. He survived the sinking in Lifeboat 15. Arthur continued to work on ships until he retired in 1956 at the age of 72. He was interviewed in the 1960s and 1970s about his experience on the Titanic. Arthur passed away in 1973 at the age of 88. He is buried in England. The next survivor is Charles Herbert Lightroller, born 1874, in England. He began his seafaring career as a seaman at the age of 13. Charles was a second officer on the Titanic and was in charge of the even-numbered lifeboats. After the Titanic sank, Charles and 30 men climbed onto overturned collapsible Lifeboat B. They were rescued by the Carpathia. Charles was the very last living Titanic survivor to be rescued. During World War I, Charles served in the Royal Navy as captain. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. In 1919, Charles returned again to White Star Line before retiring in the 1930s. Charles then started a small boat yard. In 1940, during Operation Dynamo, Charles participated in the rescue of British soldiers. Charles successfully rescued 130 men. He went on to run a boat yard, building motor launches for the London River Police. Charles passed away in 1952 at the age of 78 due to heart failure. He is buried in England. The next survivor is Aina William Lindqvist, born 1892, in Finland. He was a third-class passenger on the Titanic and survived the sinking. Ano passed away at a hospital in 1958 at the age of 66 due to a stroke. He is buried in Potter's Field, along with other Napa State Hospital patients who could not afford a marker. In 2012, Ano was given a marker. The next survivor is Charles William Lindsay, born 1881, in England. He worked on the Titanic as a fireman. Charles escaped an overturned collapsible lifeboat B. He passed away in 1960 at the age of 79. Charles is buried in England at the family plot, but he is not mentioned on the headstone. The next survivor is Sigrid Posse Lindström, born 1856, in Sweden. She was a first-class passenger on the Titanic and survived. Sigrid passed away in 1946 at the age of 89. She was buried in Sweden. Graveside details state the following. The time of the lease for the grave ended in 1969. We are sorry to say that the grave no longer exists and there is no headstone. The grave has now been given to a new family since 1969. The next survivor is the Lines family. Mother, Elizabeth Lindsay James Lines. Daughter, Mary Conover Lines. Elizabeth Lindsay James Lines, born 1861, in New Jersey. She boarded the Titanic along with her daughter. They survived the sinking in Lifeboat 9. Elizabeth passed away in 1942 at the age of 81 due to pneumonia. She is buried in Massachusetts. Mary Conover Lines, born 1895, in New Jersey. In 1919, she married Mr. Wellman, and they had one daughter and 2 sons. Mary passed away in 1975 at the age of 80 due to a cerebral hemorrhage. She is buried in Massachusetts. The next survivor is Alexander James Littlejohn, born 1872, in England. He worked on the Titanic as a dining room steward, first class. Alexander survived the sinking in Lifeboat 13. He passed away in 1949 at the age of 77. Alexander is buried in England. Later, Alexander's surviving relatives were the ones who scattered the ashes of Milvina Dean, the last Titanic survivor. The next survivor is Gretchen Fisk Longley Leopold, born 1890, in New York. She survived the sinking in Lifeboat 10. Gretchen later married Dr. Leopold. She passed away in 1965 at the age of 74. Gretchen is buried in Pennsylvania. The next survivor is Alice Adelaide Slow Latch, born 1869, in England. She boarded the Titanic with her husband and were second-class passengers. Alice survived the sinking in Lifeboat 14. Her husband perished in the sinking. Alice passed away in 1949 at the age of 79 due to a cerebral hemorrhage. She is buried in England. The next survivor is Harold Godfrey Lowe, born 1882, in Wales. He began his career at sea at the age of 14 after running away from home. In 1911, Harold joined the White Star Line. He was a 5th officer on board the Titanic. On that fateful night, Harold noticed passengers milling about, wearing life belts. Dressing quickly, he grabbed his automatic pistol revolver. Harold went to the boat deck, helping the 3rd officer load passengers into lifeboats. During the lowering, Harold became involved in a heated confrontation with Bruce Ismay. Harold was then placed in charge of Lifeboat 14 on the opposite side of the ship. The situation became more desperate by panicking passengers. Harold was forced to fire warning shots. Pictured here is the uniform Harold was wearing when he survived the sinking. Following the disaster, Harold served in the Royal Navy during World War I. Harold retired in Wales with his wife. He passed away in 1944, at the age of 61, due to hypertension. Harold is buried in Wales. The next survivor is William Arthur Lucas, born 1886, in England. He worked on the Titanic as a seaman. William survived the sinking in lifeboat D. He passed away in 1921, at the age of 35, due to shooting himself while on a train. William is buried in England. The next survivor is William Watson Lucas, born 1881, in England. He worked on the Titanic as a dining room steward, first class. William survived the sinking in lifeboat A. He passed away in 1944, at the age of 63. William is buried in England with his sister, in an unmarked grave. The next survivor is Nikola Lulic, born 1883, in Croatia. He boarded the Titanic as a third-class passenger. Nikola survived the sinking in lifeboat 15. He passed away in 1962, at the age of 79. Nikola is buried in Croatia. The next survivor is Olga Alida London, born 1889, in Sweden. She boarded the Titanic as a second-class passenger. Olga was rescued in lifeboat 10. She later worked as a cook for the Norwegian Crown Prince. Olga married Mr. Anderson. She passed away in 1973, at the age of 84. Olga is buried in Sweden. The next survivor is Thur Edvin Lundström, born 1880, in Sweden. He boarded the Titanic as a third-class passenger and was accompanied by his fiancée. Thur was rescued in lifeboat 15, but his fiancée perished in the sinking. He never returned to Sweden. Thur later remarried. In 1941, he passed away suddenly while on a carpentry job in Las Vegas, Nevada. Thur was 62 years of age and the cause of death was due to a cerebral hemorrhage. He is buried in California. The next survivor is Eugénie Elise Lorette, born 1852, in France. She boarded the Titanic as a first-class passenger. Eugénie was the maid to Mrs. Spencer. They both were rescued in lifeboat 6. Eugénie passed away in 1940, at the age of 87. She is buried in France. However, her grave has since been removed. If you like this content, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to my channel at MeTime806. Thank you very much.